I've debated sharing this for a while. It's been almost a year since it happened, but I still can't make sense of it. Maybe writing it down will help. Last Christmas was my first one alone in years. My ex and I broke up in November, and it wasn't amicable. We were together for 4 years, living in a small apartment in Denver. She left, saying I'd become distant and too focused on work. She wasn't wrong. I'm a field tech for a telecom company, and I was constantly on the road. I figured I'd throw myself into my work and deal with the breakup later. So, when I got scheduled to be on the road over Christmas, I didn't fight it. It wasn't like I had anywhere to be. The plan was simple. Drive to a few small towns in Nebraska, check some relay stations, and head back to my empty apartment before New Year's. On Christmas Eve, I was driving through the kind of rural area where the radio cuts out and the gas stations are 50 miles apart. The sun set early and a snowstorm rolled in fast. My truck's GPS said there was a motel about 20 miles ahead, so I pushed through. By the time I got there, the snow was coming down so hard I could barely see. The motel wasn't much, just a row of rooms with flickering neon lights out front. There was one other car in the lot, a rusted sedan, half buried in snow. The guy at the front desk looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. He handed me a key, muttered something about the storm getting worse, and went back to watching an old Christmas special on a tiny TV. My room was at the far end, number 8. The first thing I noticed when I walked in was how cold it was. The heater was one of those ancient wall units that made more noise than heat. Still, it beat sleeping in the truck. I turned it up full blast, threw my bag on the bed, and sat down to check my phone. No signal. I wasn't surprised, but it didn't stop me from feeling a little more alone. I opened a beer from my cooler and put on a Christmas movie I'd downloaded earlier. It was something to pass the time. Around 10 p.m., I thought I heard a knock at the door. It was faint, almost like it was coming from far away. I muted the movie and listened. Nothing. I figured it must have been the wind. Then it came again, louder this time. 3 sharp knocks. I got up, pulling on my coat, and opened the door. The snow was still coming down hard, and the wind bit at my face. There was no one there. Just the empty parking lot and that rusted sedan, its windows frosted over. I shut the door, telling myself it was just the storm playing tricks on me. About an hour later, I was half asleep when I heard it again. 3 knocks, but this time they came from the wall that connected my room to the empty one next door. "Hello?" I called out, but there was no response. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the broken heater. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every so often, I thought I heard faint sounds, like muffled voices or shuffling feet. But when I checked the hallway, it was always empty. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to a strange sound. It was humming, a low, melodic humming, coming from the other side of the wall. I shot out of bed, my heart racing. I knew for a fact the room next to mine was unoccupied. The guy at the front desk had told me I was one of only 2 guests. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped into the hallway. Room 7's door was slightly ajar, the light inside flickering like a dying bulb. "Hello?" I called again, but my voice sounded small, swallowed by the oppressive silence. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. No luggage, no signs of anyone staying there. But on the bed, there was something strange. A single wrapped Christmas gift, tied with a bright red ribbon. I don't know why, but I stepped closer. The air in the room felt wrong, heavy and freezing cold. My breath misted in front of me as I reached out and untied the ribbon. The paper fell away to reveal a small wooden box. Inside was a Polaroid photo of me. It was taken earlier that night, sitting on the bed in my room. I dropped the box and ran. I didn't bother checking out or grabbing my bag. I got in my truck and drove through the storm until I hit the next town. I spent Christmas Day in a diner, drinking bad coffee and trying to convince myself it was some kind of elaborate prank. But the part that still keeps me up at night? When I got back to Denver a few days later, I found the same wooden box sitting on my kitchen counter. Would you stay in a motel after that? Because I haven't. Not since. This happened to me 2 years ago, and I've been trying to convince myself ever since that it was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But deep down, I know it wasn't. For context, I'm a 35-year-old guy. I've been single for a while now, ever since my fiancée left me 3 years ago. I won't get into the details, but it was one of those heartbreaks that leave you questioning everything about your life. After that, I moved out to a small, isolated cabin in northern Michigan to start over. It's quiet, and the nearest neighbor is half a mile away. I work remotely, so it's perfect for solitude. I've never been big on Christmas since I left home at 18, but that year I decided to make an effort. It felt sad, sitting in a cold cabin with no decorations, so I went to a thrift store in town and bought a small fake tree and a box of old ornaments. Most of them were chipped or scratched, but they had charm. There was one ornament, though, that stood out. It was a glass sphere with a tiny hand-painted village inside, complete with glittering snow and a miniature train. It looked so delicate that I was surprised it was in such good condition. I hung it in the center of the tree and plugged in the lights. For the first time in years, the cabin felt warm. That night, as I was lying in bed, I heard something faint. At first, I thought it was the wind whipping through the trees. It was always windy up there. But this was different. It was faintly rhythmic, like a far-off train whistle and the sound of tiny wheels clattering along tracks. I shook it off as my imagination, maybe triggered by the ornament. The next morning, I was drinking coffee and scrolling through my phone when I noticed the ornament had moved. It was no longer hanging in the center of the tree. Instead, it dangled precariously close to the edge of a branch. I figured I must have bumped the tree without realizing it, so I adjusted it and moved on with my day. That night, it happened again. The sound woke me up at exactly 2:37 a.m. This time, it was clearer, like a train running just outside my cabin. I swear I even felt a slight vibration in the floor. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to get up and look out the window. Nothing. Just the snow-covered forest, still and lifeless under the moonlight. I didn't sleep much after that. The third night was worse. The sound started earlier, around midnight. I sat in the living room, staring at the tree, waiting for something to happen. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe for the ornament to fall or for the lights to flicker. But nothing happened. The sound faded after about an hour, and I felt ridiculous for sitting there like a paranoid idiot. Then I looked closer at the ornament. The miniature village inside wasn't the same. There were more buildings now, tiny houses that hadn't been there before, and the train had stopped. Its engine was at the edge of the glass, almost as if it were about to break through. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity before finally grabbing the ornament and throwing it into the fireplace. The glass shattered instantly, and the paint curled and blackened in the flames. For a moment, I felt relief. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder. I swear to God, the floor started shaking, and I heard the whistle blaring as if it were right outside the cabin. The windows rattled, and I could see something moving through the snow. Not a train, but figures, small ones. They were walking toward the cabin, no taller than 2 or 3 feet, their shadows flickering in the firelight. I bolted upstairs to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My phone had no signal, typical in bad weather, and all I could do was sit in the corner, clutching a baseball bat I kept under the bed. The sound of tiny footsteps filled the house. They started downstairs, shuffling and tapping on the hardwood floors. Then they climbed the stairs, one slow, deliberate step at a time. I swear I heard whispering too, but it wasn't in any language I recognized. It was high-pitched, like a recording played too fast. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. The knob rattled, and I held my breath, praying it wouldn't turn. Then the whispering stopped. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe the whole night. When the sun finally rose, everything was quiet. I opened the door to find my house completely undisturbed. No footprints, no broken locks, nothing. Even the tree was still standing, though the spot where the ornament had been looked oddly empty. I packed a bag and left that same day. I spent Christmas in a motel 2 towns over and put the cabin up for sale a week later. I never went back. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear faint train whistles, even though I live nowhere near a railroad. I don't celebrate Christmas anymore. If this happened to you, would you ever put up a tree again? I'm not sure if I'm posting this for advice or just to get it off my chest, but it's been haunting me, and I need to tell someone. This happened last Christmas Eve, and even now I have trouble sleeping. I lived alone in a small rental house on the edge of a quiet town. It's nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, a decent-sized living room, and a kitchen that could use some renovations. My family's all out of state, so I usually spend Christmas by myself. I don't mind, I've gotten used to it. Last year, I decided to make an effort. I bought some string lights, put up a small artificial tree, and even hung a wreath on the front door. It wasn't much, but it made the place feel less lonely. I had plans to watch some Christmas movies, drink too much wine, and sleep in on Christmas morning. That night, the snow was coming down hard, and the wind was howling. It was one of those nights where the weather makes everything outside feel distant, like the world is shrinking around you. Around 11 p.m., I was dozing off on the couch when I thought I heard something. At first, I assumed it was the wind, or maybe a branch snapping under the weight of the snow. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. A soft, deliberate tapping. It was coming from the living room window. I froze, my heart racing. My living room faces the backyard, and there's nothing back there but woods. No neighbors, no streetlights, nothing. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind blowing a branch against the glass. Still, I turned off the TV and sat in silence, listening. The tapping stopped. Then I heard a creak from the back porch. I've lived in this house long enough to recognize the sound. It's the top step, the one that always groans when you step on it. My blood ran cold. I got up slowly, grabbing the first thing I could find as a weapon, a fire poker from the stand by the fireplace. My phone was on the coffee table, but when I picked it up, I realized it had no signal. The storm must have knocked it out, and I hadn't set up Wi-Fi in the house yet. The back door has a small window, and as I approached it, I could see the faint outline of something, or someone, standing just beyond the glass. I stopped dead in my tracks, gripping the fire poker so hard my knuckles turned white. Whoever it was, they weren't moving, just standing there. I don't know how long I stood frozen, staring at that dark figure. Finally, I mustered the courage to yell, "Who's there?" No response. I shouted again, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I'm calling the police!" At that moment, the figure moved, not away, but closer. A hand pressed against the glass, fingers splayed. The hand was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light, and it left a smudge on the window as it slid down slowly. That was enough for me. I backed away, heart hammering in my chest, and ran to the kitchen to grab my car keys. My plan was to make a break for it, jump in my car, and drive into town. But as I passed the living room, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. The front door was wide open. I know I locked it earlier. I'm obsessive about it, especially living out here alone. But now it was open, snow blowing in and forming a small drift on the welcome mat. I didn't even hear it open. At that point, panic took over. I ran back to the living room, locking the door behind me, and shoved the couch against it for good measure. I crouched behind the coffee table, clutching the fire poker and staring at the windows. Then I heard footsteps. They weren't coming from outside anymore. They were inside the house. Slow, deliberate steps, moving through the kitchen. I don't remember much after that. I think I blacked out from fear. The next thing I knew, it was morning and I was still huddled behind the coffee table. The house was silent, the front door was closed, and there were no signs of anyone else. No footprints in the snow except my own. But the smudge on the back door window was still there. A handprint, too large and too distorted to be human. I moved out 2 weeks later. Even now, I don't know what really happened that night. I tried to convince myself it was some kind of waking nightmare, but every time I think about that handprint, my stomach knots up. Who or what came into my house that night, and why didn't they take anything? Or me? If you were in my position, would you ever feel safe living alone again?